When it comes to like mixing, things I've really learned is like it's more about how it makes you feel than just trying to get your kick drum perfect or whatever. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, yeah.
I've heard some really shitty mixes, and those are some of my favorite songs because the
Mm.
energy's there, because the music just hits. It's a good song. The composition is well made. So I say composition beats mixes every time.
You're listening to the Inside the Mix podcast with your host, Mark Matthews.
Hey folks, welcome to the Inside the Mix podcast, or welcome back if you are a returning listener. Before we dive into this episode, it is an interview today. I've got a question for you, or rather, have you got a question for me? I should put it that way. I'd love to hear from you. Click the link in the episode description. It's a SpeakPipe link, and submit a question and get featured on the podcast. Each month, myself and Tim Benson, R9, are getting together and we are answering your questions on the podcast. Anything music related, click on that SpeakPipe link. You don't need a fancy microphone. You don't need an account. It's literally just sending me an audio message. And each month, one lucky winner will win a coffee voucher on me. If you don't like coffee, just give it to someone else and pretend that you bought it for them. So click on that link. If you want to know more about that format, check out episode 175, What's the Secret to Mixing Without Muddiness, where you can hear an example of how we run that. So that's that bit out the way. Today, I am excited to welcome my guest today, Dan Giffin. He's a producer, performer, and Ableton certified trainer who has worked with Grammy-winning artists like Mac Miller and Machine Gun Kelly. Dan teaches Ableton live through his platform, liveproducersonline.com, and also hosts the Ableton Music Producer podcast, sharing insights with a global community of producers. Dan, that is a lot for me saying right now. Welcome, and how are you?
Man, that was a solid intro. Also, thanks for pronouncing my name right. People love to throw an R in there. Everybody thinks it's Griffin. So like A plus to you, man. You nailed it.
Yeah, that's one for me there. For once, I'm on the other side. Sometimes I get the surname incorrect, and then I get corrected off it. Usually before the episode, I double check, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to roll with it.
Yeah.
But it's always nice having another podcaster on as well.
Yeah, for
Always
sure,
nice.
man. I mean, thank you for your service. I feel like it's a lot of work running a podcast. So shout out to you for continuing to do this. What episode number will this be? How many have you done?
This will be 181.
Damn.
This episode. So when this drops, it'll be 181. And shout out to you as well. So running a podcast. It is, I don't want to say labor of love. I love doing it. I love this content creation, this content medium. But as you say, as you know, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that people don't hear or see to put these
Yeah,
together.
for sure, man. Yeah, just
Yeah.
like digging through like a previous hour of audio and then like doing the intros, the outros, the editing. You just got to find somebody to do that for you. That's the secret. Is then you just
Mm-mm.
show up and you hang out and let somebody else do all the work.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
real goal.
exactly
Yeah,
that. And then you chuck video in there as well, and that just
right.
adds a whole new nuance to it.
True. Yeah.
But yeah. So I've got a bit about your bio here. I've already mentioned a bit, but I've got a bit more that I'm going to read off. So you began your musical journey as a jazz drummer, super cool. You later evolved into live drumming for electronic music performances. And in 2018, you founded liveproducersonline.com, offering Ableton Live training for both studio production and live performances. I think, to segue here slightly, you might be the first individual on the podcast who specializes in Ableton, as in like an
Wow.
interviewee, which is quite cool. It's been a while since I've used Ableton, so we're going to dig into that a bit later in the chat today. So you've got a project. This is why I hope I pronounced this correctly. Philia? Did I pronounce
Yeah.
that right?
Nailed it.
Yeah.
Yep. That's
I'm out.
perfect.
2 for 2 right now.
Yeah.
Which blends jazz with bass music and and you've shared the stage with artists like Tiesto, cool, and Slushy at festivals such as Electric Forest. So, folks, today, I'm rambling a bit now, Dan will be sharing expert strategies for improving music production workflows, creative mixing, and live performance setups using Ableton Live. So I thought it'd be fitting to start with the question, what inspired you to start liveproducersonlive.com? Can you talk about how teaching shaped your approach to music production and performance?
Yeah, man. That's a loaded question. And also, like, thanks for having me once again on the podcast. I
No, it's my
appreciate
pleasure,
it.
mate.
And yeah, man, it's always fun nerding out with other people who are into this kind of thing. So, but yeah, as far as your question goes, like I was teaching at the Lodge Recording Studios in Indianapolis. That was like shortly after I moved to Indy, after living in New York City, where I studied at a school called Dubspot. Rest in peace. It's not there anymore, but it was a great school. That was like the place for anybody who wanted to learn Ableton Live at that time, and that was in 2013. And that was like I got really lucky to learn from some of the real OG badasses of electronic music production and teachers from all over the world, like DJ Shifty and Kiva. Shout out to Kiva. He's worked with a lot of the great like dub artists. And so, yeah, man, just nerded out and learned there for like 6 months. And then I tried to stay in New York, but I was just like a broke artist, just ran out of money, which I think like is a story for a lot of people who live in New York City because it's just stupid. So, yeah, man, I really got to learn from some great people. Danny Wyatt, he's worked with like Nora Jones and Old Dirty Bastard, and
Wow.
like even did some work with like Aretha Franklin and a lot of the greats back in the day. And so he had a cool studio in Greenpoint, or not Greenpoint. It was like north of Manhattan anyway. I forget the name of the place. But yeah, I used to go there occasionally and I learned a lot of mixing stuff from him. But then, yeah, like I said, I was broke, moved home with the family for a period of time just to save up a bunch of money and then invest it into a studio and move out of the parents' basement because that's nobody's dream. And then I ended up, yeah, man, just got to learn from some really cool people, taught a lot of, actually I got a big boy job working at insurance doing marketing because that was my degree. My undergrad was doing marketing at a small school before I went to New York. And then after that, I started teaching at the Lodge Recording Studios. They wanted to start a music program there. This is like in 2014. And 15. And so through that exposure, it was kind of like a hidden gem of a studio in the city. So a lot of big artists touring through there, like John Legend or like Ariana Grande, Mac Miller. That's where I got to meet him for an evening and got to teach him some Ableton Live workflows. He was just getting into that for making his beats. I think he was coming from Logic, but yeah, super awesome, nice guy, and got to learn a lot through that experience just teaching. And I feel like I've learned the most just by teaching because people will ask like really good questions and you're like, shit, I don't even know. And then you have to go research and then hopefully give them a good answer. So after doing that for years and years, I started thinking about like, there was a lot of students. It was an expensive program at the Lodge. So I was like, well, there's a lot of broke people like who are coming out of high school or like finishing college who want to do music. And like Live Producers was basically built out of that. Liveproducersonline.com is my website. And I have a lot of like beginner content, people getting into Ableton Live who want to go a little bit deeper. And so I just started creating an affordable training website for people to learn as an alternative to taking like a full 6-month course at the Lodge that was pretty expensive at that time. Yeah, and then there was like, some politics and stuff got involved, so I ended up leaving the Lodge at one point and started investing a little more in the site. And I was like, podcasts would be cool. Like nobody had a podcast based around Ableton Live at all at that time. And I was like kind of surprised by that. So I was like, maybe I should start one. And then I had no idea it would turn into what it's turned into today. It just got to the point I was like, I wonder who I could actually get on this podcast. So I just started aiming for the stars and reaching out to like some really cool people like Sylvia Massey and other like big engineers. And they're like, yeah, I'd love to be on the podcast. And I was like, cool, I don't know why, but let's hang out. So it was fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, and now here we are today. Oh, yeah, I guess like it's a journey. You asked like how it shaped my approach to music production and like what's inspired me. I guess like, having good mentors has been a huge thing for me as far as like learning and growing. I think it's important for anybody, especially those starting out, having a really good mentor to like guide you and hold your hand, because a lot of times you don't even know the right questions to ask, when you're starting out. And so that can be kind of hard, and then you just get lost in like a black hole of YouTubing, and then you have to watch a bunch of ads that suck, and then you're just like not actually getting the answers because some guy's talking about his music or like promoting himself for the first 5 minutes, and then you just get stuck and you don't know where to go. So I'd say like I had great mentors starting out, which I think really helped me. And it's funny because I'm unlearning a lot of stuff that I learned back then, where it's like, this is what you do. And now I'm like, doesn't even matter. Like, none of that matters. So I don't know, like I think teaching has really helped me grow. Having like a curiosity for learning, I think is like one of the most valuable skills or things anybody could have, is just staying curious on getting better. Because then you look back, like hopefully every 2 years you look back and you're like, damn, like my mixes or my tracks are better than they were 2 years ago. And that's really all that matters.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic stuff. There's lots to unpack there. So, like you mentioned there, you started out in New York and then you moved to Indianapolis, and this was back in 2023. You went through this process of delivering this course, and then kind of out of necessity, you started delivering a more accessible course for those who maybe didn't want to spend that larger amount of money. And also, like you say, when you I did something kind of similar with the podcast, I thought, you know what, I'm going to create a podcast. That sounds like a good idea. So you do it. And then in doing so, much like when you're delivering a course, you get asked the questions, and then I always routinely, weekly get asked questions. I'm like, you know what? I don't actually know the answer, but it's a very, very good question that I probably should know the answer to. And then you can go off and then investigate that and then regurgitate it to the audience. But I love what you said there about having a mentor, and also what you said about unlearning what you'd done previously. And there's a learning example I have for this, which was when I picked up the guitar and I was self-taught. And then it wasn't until I actually had a mentor, that I realized my technique was crap, and that I had to undo everything that I'd done previously to actually get to where I want to be. It also kind of mirrors my journey in terms of music and music production. When I listened back to productions that I might have done a few years ago and listen to where they are now, and you notice that progression. But one question I do have for you, Ableton, was that due to the environment you were in? Is that the reason you chose Ableton, or was it a sort of a conscious decision because of the music you were creating? Or had you tried other DAWs and you thought, no, Ableton, that's the workflow for me?
Yeah, honestly, like I think it was a YouTube and just like Googling thing. I was just looking online to see what was out there, because at the time in like 2012, 2011, I was doing a bunch of remixes in like GarageBand and Pro Tools, and I was like,
wow,
this workflow sucks. Like there's got to be something better than this. I was taking those remixes and trying to stem them out, and it sounded terrible back then. Like it was bad. And I would just play drums on top of it and then make these videos I was uploading to YouTube, and some of them were doing really well. And so I was like, well, if I want to take this to the stage and start performing these remixes with doing live drums, mostly like I was really getting into electronic music, because like dubstep was really like pioneering and exploding in like 2010 at that time, 2011. And so I just really got into that because I had a jazz background, but I was like, how are they creating these crazy alien noises? Like, this is so cool. Like sonically, it was so fascinating to me. And then I just kept seeing videos on YouTube and like just a bunch of stuff on Google and forums of people talking about Ableton. And so I was like, okay, I need to check this out. Downloaded it, played with it for a week. It took me like a whole day just to figure out how to get sound out of it.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I need to go actually learn from people who really know what they're doing. And Dubspot was really the only school at that time that was like the world-class standard. So that's why I chose that.
That makes perfect sense. And I have dabbled with Ableton in the past. I went down the route of using Max MSP. It wasn't necessarily to create music at the time, but I was creating my own plugins. And I created an emulation of the Space Echo using Max MSP. I went down a proper rabbit hole, man. Of like Ableton and this integration. And I did use it. Did I use Rewire with Ableton, or was that with Reason? It might have been with Reason. Could have been with Ableton.
You could.
Yeah, I think you can, can't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember as well when I used Ableton once, I also used it to do a real-time reenactment of the scene from Terminator 2 in the LA Viaduct using triggered sounds. So that was good fun. I really do need to get back. Now I'm saying this aloud. It's made me think, you know what? This year I'm going to get back into using Ableton and that performance element of it.
Yeah, it's not too late, man. It's never too late.
No, exactly that. Yeah, totally, man. Totally. So, audience listening, you've got to hold me accountable to that now. Slight segue here. You mentioned about the podcast, and I haven't got this in my notes here, and you were reaching for the stars for guests to come on to your podcast. I'm going to put you on the spot a bit here. Who is sort of like your favorite guest, or maybe what episode would you signpost the listeners to listen to?
Damn, man. That's a tough one because there's been so many good ones. That's hard to pick. You know, it's fun because like every person has their own take or things that they want to talk about. So like I'll have notes going to episodes, and then like half the time we don't even touch on half of the notes. Like we just end up going off of the rails. But you know, I did have Frequent was a fun one. Frequent was a good time. He had some really good like concepts on just creating music in general. We didn't get as nerdy as I was hoping we would, because some episodes we go real deep, and other ones are just more like light and conceptual. His was really good. Flostradamus was a fun one. Flostradamus had a great episode. That was like maybe like 120, 130.
Yeah.
Sylvia Massey was fun. We didn't really go deep into the audio, but she talked about how she like recorded a bunch of chickens. And like she created a whole graph on like how to properly mic a chicken.
Wow.
She talked about how this was like way back in the day. This might have been episode like 60 or 70 or somewhere around there.
Yeah.
But she talked a lot about like she just bought $1 million worth of vintage microphones. And so she had this semi trailer that she bid on at an auction and got like an old gramophone. It was like one of the first gramophones ever made. She got like this really old mic that she didn't know how to use or even properly set up, because it was like one of the first ever made. So she goes into a little bit of like fun stories with that one. Also talked about how she like took a garden hose and then like taped a SM58 to it, and then like basically used it as a mic overhead and then just slammed it through a bunch of compressors really hard. Like, because of the way the sound was traveling through the hose with all the compression, it just made the transients like crazy intense.
Wow.
And like she's really creative. She talked about recording in an old nuclear Russian submarine with like a rock band.
Yeah, man, I'm all over that. That'd be amazing.
She's fun. She's like the mom of like audio engineers. Like she has that motherly vibe, but she's done it all, man. She's cool.
The great thing about that, it kind of exemplifies the idea that there are there are rules, and you kind of got to know the rules to break the rules. But ultimately, you can do whatever you want. Like when it comes to creating sound and being creative. Oh, I like miking chickens. Yeah. And going on a Russian nuclear sub. Oh, mate, that'd be amazing. I'd be all over that.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say, it kind of segues into my next question. And this is more to do with sort of like the development within DAWs, but maybe you could share one tool or feature you wish existed in Ableton Live, or any other DAW for a matter of fact, that could make music production even better. Your workflow better.
How much time do we have? I think like one of the things I talked about recently on the podcast, I think it might have been with Alberto Chapa. He's like the head of sales for Ableton. He was on the podcast recently. And he's a good friend of mine. Shout out to Alberto. But he and I talked about like AI tools and things that are coming. I thought it'd be really sick, and maybe it exists, I just don't know of it, if there was like a Max for Live device that could run in Ableton, or if there was some kind of plugin or tool that could help you finish full songs or compositions based off of the material you already have. So let's say that like, this is more from a production standpoint, but if I'm producing and I've got like 16 bars or maybe like 30 seconds to a minute of a track made, and I'm working on it, but I get stuck. Like this is a super common problem for anybody. Like you get stuck and you're like, where do I go from here? And you could just have this tool that you like pull in. Maybe it's a VST, maybe it's a standalone app, I don't know. But it can just take the content and it can just copy and paste across all the tracks, the clips, and say, here's like A, B, C, D, different variations of what you already have, and let's just finish this into a 3-minute full song. Like, I think that would be an incredibly valuable tool for people. You could bust out music so fast if you had some kind of compositional AI buddy or tool that could help you just bang out tracks like that. And I know there's some stuff like out there. There's like this Max for Live device that can kind of help with some of it, but it doesn't finish the song necessarily for you. And obviously you could probably still mix it, but compositionally, if you had something to help with that process, I think that would be huge. And I think it's coming. I think there's a lot of tools like that are on their way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's kind of like harking back to when you have another musician in the room and like being able to bounce ideas back and forth with them. And just having this generative approach using AI. And it's kind of like ChatGPT, isn't it? Or other platforms whereby you put in a prompt and it'll give you 2 possible answers, whereas within this instance, it's going to give you a few more. Mm-hmm. I was chatting to somebody on the podcast recently, and they did allude to a platform. Like I use Splice myself, and I don't think Splice have it. Splice is very good. Yeah. In whereby you can put in an 8-bar loop, and then it will. Does it generate? Does it take that into account and then start to piece a track together for you? I cannot remember.
So.
I might be totally making this up, and I might have dreamt this. But this individual alluded to it. I'm going to have to go back and listen to some previous episodes and look at some notes to whether or not this exists.
That'd be cool.
It would be very cool.
I know that like Splice has something called Bridge where you can listen to samples inside of the DAW, but I don't know if it actually can like replicate existing content in your DAW.
No, I don't think it does.
Yeah, but it'd be cool if there was something like that. I mean, the other thing that I wish Ableton Live specifically had that FL and Logic has is some kind of stem separation. So if you have like a full wave track, you could just rip out the drums or the vocals. I know they have that built in now, and I think it's coming for Ableton Live, but it's not quite there yet. And I think that with the release of the new Live 12, they've rolled out a lot of really cool features, like better organization in the browser, so you can quickly find stuff. It can detect whether something is like a one-shot sample. It has similar sounds, so if you find a good snare that you like, it can like basically sonically show every other snare on your computer in your library that has a similar sonic quality to it. So
nice.
There's like little things like that in workflows they've updated in the new 12 release. Another thing that would be kind of cool is if there was like some key auto detection. So in other words, if you're searching for samples or stuff in your browser, then you could automatically say, okay, this is the key of A, this is the key of D, whatever. They have done a lot with updating their new Live 12 with the, what's it called? Basically, just you can choose what key you're producing or working in, and then you can lock in the MIDI clips to that, or there's certain devices that will automatically, like the chord effect. So you can just throw a chord effect on there. It'll automatically play MIDI notes in key.
Okay, yeah.
There's like a bunch of stuff like that. Scale awareness is what it's called.
Yeah.
So it's scale aware now, which is really cool. But it'd be awesome if there was like some, Mixed in Key Live is great. It's a plugin that can basically detect anything on your sound card on your computer. So it'll tell you what key you're in right away, which could be helpful if you're like trying to do some kind of harmonic saturation and you want to like tune stuff or your kick drum, like you can do that really easily. Or if you're like looking for a song on Spotify because you're creating a live DJ set or something, it'll just tell you exactly all the harmonics being played and what key you're in, the tempo. So Mixed in Key Live is a cool plugin that does that inside and outside your DAW. But yeah, it'd be cool if that was built in.
Nice. The stem splitter in Logic Pro is very good, and I wish I could remember what episode of the podcast it was where I did a demo of it. So audience listening, go back and listen. I want to say it's episode 150 something of the podcast where I went through the Logic Pro stem splitter, but very, very useful. Yeah, it came out in Logic Pro 11, but you have to have the M1 or M2. You have to have basically Apple Silicon processor, but that's a conversation. Really? Yes. I put a YouTube short out on that, and I regularly have comments on there with regards to that and people finding that out quite quickly. Yeah, but going back to what you said about tuning kick drums, because I do that manually. I do it by ear. So having a process to automate that and do that for me would be very nice, and do it like immediately for me would be great.
Yeah.
I mean, that being said, I was going to say I enjoy tuning by ear to an extent. I think it depends what part of the workflow I'm in and what day I'm having when it comes to tuning things by ear.
For sure.
But you mentioned there about live, so this kind of moves on to my next question. For producers just getting into live performance setups, what are some essential tips for building a solid live rig in Ableton?
Just like, don't suck, I guess. No, I'm just kidding.
It's a good one.
Just don't sound bad.
Yeah.
That's my best tip.
It helps.
No, I think that, I don't know, there's two different angles I would answer this question. The first would be for the artist, and the second would be for the person actually doing the playback tech or the engineer. I think if, I've done some work with some like pretty bigger name artists and helping with their live rigs, and for the artist I'd say like make it as simple as you possibly can, because you don't want to think on stage. You want to be able to perform and just enjoy that flow state of performing and engaging with the audience. So the less you have to think about what you're doing, the better. Ableton Live was originally made for live performance. Obviously it's the industry standard for performing from like small to big shows. Laura Escadé, she teaches a class called Master Track, and you can look up her team called Electronic Creatives. I took her Master Track, and she works with all like the biggest names. She does playback tech for the Grammys and like pretty much everybody in that world. So I learned a lot from her and her approach with redundancy. So from a playback tech standpoint, I'd say like know your hardware inside and out. For larger shows, if you're playing a bigger show, maybe like 1,000+ people, whatever, use a redundant rig, because you just never know. Maybe it's too hot, your laptop fan burns out, you get like a little sputter in audio or something happens. You definitely want to use a redundant rig for a big show. And so she specializes in that. So basically you have like 2 laptops that are like fed a tone to each other. And so if like any audio blips or breaks, it immediately switches over without any latency, so that there's no cutout in audio whatsoever. iConnectivity interfaces are really made for that and are really easy to use. So they have like their audio, whatever interface it's called, that's really popular. I'd also say like plan ahead. Like you can't over plan on the tech side for a show.
Yeah.
So like stress test the hell out of your setup. As far as like the sound and live playback tech, I'd say it really depends on the live situation and your budget, but having more control over the sound is like preferable for me whenever I played shows and stuff, because I like to play with live instruments. But I kind of do a weird mix where I DJ and I have live instruments jumping in and out. Like I'm playing a show in a month and I've got a sax, a keyboard player, a guitar player, and keys. And then I'm also playing like a drum hybrid electronic setup. And so I'm actually just doing a left and the right. I'm just handing a left and the right to the sound guy, and I have it all dialed in.
Nice.
It's an outside show, which helps with the acoustics.
Yeah.
But I know my sound, and I know that I'm practicing enough with the band where we have it dialed in, and I can control all that through my Apollo interface and with my laptop and my Ableton Live setup. So if you don't have a traveling sound man that really knows your music, that's a preferable setup for me.
Yeah. I was going to say a lot of what you've said there, it kind of echoes back when I was in a band, and what you mentioned there about right at the end about having a sound guy. Towards the end of my tenure in the band, we had a sound guy for that particular reason. He knew our sound and he was able to take control of the desk where possible. I found this was when we were in a metal band, and some venues we went to, there were some sound engineers got a bit salty when you pushed them off. But then again, I thought to myself, it's giving you a night off, surely, and you're still getting paid. But then again, some were a bit precious over that. Stress testing as well is massive. I think we often did that. And redundancy. Like I learned that having a spare guitar in particular, strings break, goes out of tune. And it transcends genre, doesn't it, really, when it comes to like these tips. And flow state as well. That's why, coming from the sort of the metal background that I do, you'll see things as granular as the guitar tech just triggering a pedal, turning a pedal on and off when there's a clean or distorted section. So all really, really, really good advice.
I would also want to say one more thing too.
Yeah, go
like,
for it.
As far as the stress testing, like I'm always really careful about using third-party plugins for any live instrument patches and stuff, because that'll definitely strain your CPU.
Yeah.
So I try to stay as native as possible. And you can, if you do have like an Omnisphere or something patch in the original recording that you want to use live, say on your MIDI keyboard, then there is a Max for Live device that I created with a brilliant guy named Toby Hunka. He has his website, abletondrummer.com, and he's brilliant with Max for Live development. But we created something called Resampler Pro. You could just go to Live Producers Online or type in Live Producers Online Resampler Pro, and it's a free download, and it basically automates the sample pack or plugin patch creation process for you. So you could say, okay, I need 4 octaves of this plugin sound in Omnisphere.
Yeah.
Then you just hit go, and it just records a note, and you can just set the sustain, attack, release time, or whatever, and then record every single individual note. Because if you just try to record one note and then you shift that up or down as you're playing on a keyboard, then you're stretching that audio waveform, and it's actually going to degrade the quality. So this allows you to multi-sample every single individual note, and then you can drag and drop that into Ableton's sampler instrument. And there's a tutorial when you download the free device. It shows you how to do that. But that's a good option if people are playing a bunch of patches live with third-party plugins that are a pain in the ass as far as CPU.
Amazing. Where can they find that again? Where can the audience find that again?
Yeah, it's on my website. If you just go to Google and type in Live Producers Online and then type in Resampler Pro, or I think it's I think the actual URL address is just, I think it's liveproducersonline.com/resampler-pro.
Cool. Well, I could put it in the show notes for the audience listening. They could click on that. I got to phrase that. Did you say it was a free plugin? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, just give me your email and I'll just send you a bunch of spam. No, I'm just kidding. I won't do that. I hate that. I won't do that to you.
It's very kind, man. It's very kind.
Yeah.
And I realise we're already halfway in. And as I say, I know, like you mentioned right at the beginning, invariably you don't get through all the questions. But there's one question I do want to ask you before before we wrap things up. So
Absolutely.
you've collaborated with some big names and performed at major festivals and continue to do so. Can you tell us about one standout experience or lesson from those moments that has shaped your career?
Yeah, I definitely have some standout moments that are fun.
Yeah.
I'll tell a fun story real quick.
Yeah,
So
do it.
basically, I was just out of high school and I was playing drums and I got picked up by some like really shitty band, but they were paying me really well. And so we did like a Midwest East Coast tour in the US. And one of the biggest shows I ever played at that time was like probably 1,000 people. And I was so excited that we were opening up for the headliner. And I broke a drumstick. And rather than just being a normal person and tossing a drumstick to the crowd, I chucked it as hard as I could. And it hit some like 18-year-old girl in the face, and she like did a little backflip and fell. And if anybody knows anything about drumsticks, like they don't split like in a clean way. It's like
Nope.
sharp wood, right? So like I just like straight up hit her like you would try to kill a vampire, and just like hit her. She did a backflip. We didn't see her the rest of the show. Like the band stopped playing for 2 seconds because they saw it happen. They all just turned at me like, what the fuck? And so she might be dead. We don't know. But that was a lesson learned. It's like if you are a drummer, don't like throw sharp wooden drumsticks really hard into the crowd. If you're going to do it, just be a normal person and toss it lightly.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a lesson experience and something very memorable in my career. I thought that was kind of a crazy moment. But yeah,
That's amazing. I love that.
but I'd say like most of the opportunities come from like word of mouth. And like one quote that I really liked is, it's not about who you know, but rather who knows you. And so like I just encourage people to put your name out there. It doesn't matter if you know a bunch of people. If nobody knows who you are, you're not going to get a phone call necessarily, or people aren't going to hit you up. So like don't be afraid to like get out there. If you're wanting more work, just like mixing and mastering, don't be afraid to give away stuff for free, at least in the beginning, because you got to build that portfolio. I'm thankful now where I've brushed shoulders with some people where like, you know, people know who I am to a certain extent. Like don't be afraid to put yourself out there and to be able to do some things for free, especially if you're interested in it in the beginning, and like always give more than you take. I think that's just like a standard universal rule that I really subscribe to, is if you are generous with your time and your energy, it'll come back to you. And reputation is everything, especially in the music industry. So just be a good person and like try to get into social circles with people that you want to connect with, and just be a real person. And then when it comes to like mixing, things I've really learned is like it's more about how it makes you feel than just trying to get your kick drum perfect or whatever. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I've heard some really shitty mixes, and those are some of my favorite songs because the energy's there, because the music just hits. It's a good song. The composition is well made. So I say composition beats mixes every time. But I think that if you can have a great composition and a great mix, that's a big selling point. And that's going to be a song that hits the hardest. But I'd say like in the end of the day, if you're playing with it more than 3 times and you don't know if it's better or worse, then just like you're fine, move on. Because I've gotten lost in the sauce of just tweaking the same thing over and over. So that's my golden rule. If you touch it more than 3 times, you still don't know if it's better or worse, it's fine. Just move on. Yeah.
Wise words, my friend. Wise words. So a few things there. Obviously, there's the one with the drumstick. Don't throw full force of drumstick at someone in the crowd, which is amazing. Trying to think if my drummer ever did that. I know he fell off his stool and didn't get back up. I remember that.
Damn.
Yeah. He was too pissed and he fell off. That was it. And
That
then
sucks.
that was a life lesson. We said, mate, don't drink to that extent again.
Yeah, that'll do it.
But the second part you mentioned about sort of, well, it's essentially networking and putting yourself out there and doing services for free just to build up that portfolio and meet people and rub shoulders with the right people, move in the right circles and whatnot. And reputation is everything. And also give more than you ask for. I paraphrase, it might be a really bad way of putting it, but it echoes the conversation I had with a mix engineer called Elliot Glynn on episode 178, who said the exact same thing. And I may have even put a post out on social media this week saying reputation is everything from that episode. And he said the exact same, and we had a really good conversation about it. And also the go-giver mentality of just give. That's kind of what we do with the podcast, really.
Yeah.
It's just conveying information, giving it out, just giving and giving, and not really asking for anything in return. Because I think as soon as you start doing that, it gets a bit, it gets a bit uncomfortable. I think if you start giving with the idea that you're going to get something in return immediately, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there is like a point, a crossover at some point though, where you do enough of that work and eventually your reputation builds, your portfolio builds,
Mm-hmm.
and then you don't want people to take advantage of you either.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
you need to recognize your worth.
Yeah, most definitely. And
Yeah.
also, just the final bit you added there, right at the end, which I really liked, was about the three touch rule. About if you touch it three times and you still don't know whether it's better or worse, than to leave it and move on. Because I think that really helps. Because, like you say there, you mentioned, and I do as well, you can quite easily get stuck in the weeds and just
Yeah.
get lost in what it is you're doing, and then realize an hour or two later it sounds worse than it did before. So I think that's a really, really good one for the audience listening to
Yeah, it's
take
easy to
forward.
it's easy to get lost in the sauce
Yeah, I've
for
done it.
sure.
I've done it. And then I remember I've had many conversations on this podcast with individuals saying they're on like mix iteration 20, 25, 30. I'm thinking, I'm not entirely sure that's going to be conducive to, it's going to make it any better. I think you've gone way past the point of diminishing returns. You know,
Yeah,
if you're
that's
at that,
true.
if you're at
At
that
that
point.
point, at that point, you just need to leave it and then come back later. Maybe
Yeah.
wait like a week or a couple days and just let your ears take a break.
Hmm.
Because there is something about that. Like you start perceiving things that aren't even there when you
Yeah.
start to listen to something too much. Because your ears will definitely play tricks on you.
Yeah. I was going to say I do that generally in life. I perceive that makes me sound
Yeah,
quite crazy. When
that's true.
yeah, I was thinking, shall I say that? Shall I not say that? But I said it. I live in a very old house, and I'm sure it's haunted. But that's a different.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really old. It gets a bit macabre. But the guy who we bought it from, he died in there. So unfortunate for him.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's fun, man. You
yeah,
could have
yeah.
like a Halloween party at your house every year and like do some like ghost hunting.
Yeah, I'd love to go on a ghost hunt. I really would. I almost went on a ghost hunt, but they cancelled it last minute, and I
Really?
never took it up again.
Oh,
Be
that's
great.
wild.
Yeah, I know. I'd always be. I'm dubious. I'm skeptical, but I want to. Like, if I saw one, I'd be. I don't know what I'd do. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's a topic for another episode. Ghost. That's like a side quest of mine. Ghost hunting on the
There you go.
podcast. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that'd be good fun.
That sounds fun. I grew up in Ohio in the US and it has like the most haunted sites in
Does
the
it?
US, the state, I believe so. I think it
Wow.
still does. And yeah, some wild stories. Me and my friends like in high school would break into these really old homes that were supposed to be abandoned.
Yeah.
Saw some weird stories. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember doing that sort of things. There was an old mental hospital just outside of where I used to live, and we went there, and it was like something out of like 28 Days Later or The Walking
Whoa.
Dead, and it was just like one day everybody just left, and there was just like documents and stuff all over the floor and some other weird shit, and then invariably the alarm would go off, the police would turn up, and we just leg it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm not going to say where it was. I'm sure the individuals who own that land are listening to this podcast, but in case they are, you never know.
I think both of us do not condone breaking and entering because I think
Yes.
just want to put that out there.
Yeah, thank you for
Don't
thank you for
support
that. Yeah.
don't support breaking and entering at all.
Yeah, please don't do that. Yeah. Oh, I heard it's a good thing to do because this place might be haunted.
Yeah.
Where did you hear that? Yeah,
It
don't
is
do
fun
that.
though. It is
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, 100%. Dan, I think I know you've touched already on your website, but maybe opportunity now. Where's the best place to find you? Have you got anything coming up that you want to share with the audience? I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah. Once again, thanks for having me, Mark. This is super fun. I could do this all day. I did build a new AI chatbot specifically to help people with Ableton Live. And so it's trained on all the manuals. It's trained on all my podcast episodes. It's trained on my favorite plugins and Macs for live devices for mixing or whatever else. You can ask it for specific help with mixing, like, how do I properly use a de-esser? What plugins would you recommend? You can do a lot of different things with it. And so I'm actually really stoked. It's in beta right now, but people can still access it and play with it, but it's going to get a lot smarter in about a month from now.
Wow.
I'm going to be updating it. I'm working with a really brilliant programmer who's helping me with it right now. So his name is Abe.
Yeah.
And you can access him on my website, liveproducersonline.com. There's like a membership plans button, and you can see Abe has like his own plan. But then I've got other courses that are more intro level to Ableton Live or mixing. If you want to jump in there and you're interested in getting into Ableton Live for live performance or just producing, there's a bunch of stuff in there. And Abe can help you as well. My music is Philia, so if you want to hang out, I'm mostly on Instagram. You can either look up Ableton Podcast or Philia Music, Philia Music. Yeah, I would love to connect with you guys. Slide into my DMs, say what's up, say hello. Yeah, check out the Ableton podcast if you wanna listen. That'd be pretty cool.
Amazing stuff. That chatbot sounds incredible. Fair
Yeah,
play,
do you want to
man.
ask him a question real quick?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll take like no time. Here, ask him a question. What would you ask him?
What's the question I get asked the most on the podcast? How to improve kick bass frequency balance.
Okay.
A bit vague, but
So I asked him, how do I improve my kick bass frequency balance?
Mm,
Okay, let's see what he says. He's thinking.
nice.
It says to improve the frequency balance between your kick and bass, consider the following strategies, EQ techniques. Oh, he's still going. I'll summarize this because there's a lot in here.
Yeah.
EQ techniques, bass control, use peak EQ with a center frequency around 100 hertz to boost the punch in your kick or bass drum sounds. It can help in defining the low end presence. Mid control, adjust the mid frequencies to ensure clarity. You can use a 3-way switchable boosting EQ to set the center frequency and range. It helps managing the overlap between kick and bass. Treble control, use a shelving EQ with a cutoff frequency around 3.3 to manage high frequencies. It can help reducing the harshness and add clarity. Compositional approach, think of your kick and bass as single compositional line. Avoid playing bass notes simultaneously on top of the kick. Instead, create a bass line that fits between the kick drum patterns. Offbeat bass notes, talks about different genres and where that applies. Additional tips, sub-switch, use a low shelf filter to boost frequencies below 200 hertz if needed. Be cautious of muddying the mix in this frequency range. Dry-wet balance, side chaining, talks about side chaining relationship between kick and bass and compressor settings.
Impressive, man.
Yeah, there's some more stuff in there, but
That's great.
we don't need to keep going into it.
Yeah. I think that's fantastic. Lots of really great stuff in there. There you go, audience listening. So do go and check that out. Head over to liveproducers.com and
Yeah,
check
Live
that
Producers Online.
out. Online. There we go. I'll get something wrong eventually on here.
It's fine. You're so close, man. You
I
almost
know.
had it.
I always got
So
all the
close.
way to the end.
Yeah.
And then I messed it up. Yeah, go check out Abe. That sounds incredible, mate. But Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
No, it's my pleasure, mate. My pleasure. Good luck with everything, and I'll catch up with you soon.